It's been so lovely to hear someone else talking about motivation, because I always feel like I'm the only one talking about motivation. So it was really nice to see that you have included this as well. I would like to talk to you about motivation to learn and its role for adult learning. And it's taken from a study that's already published. I have first investigated the nomological network, that is the interrelation between motivation to learn and other similar theoretical constructs. And I also used the PIAAC longitudinal data to then investigate its effect from a longitudinal perspective to future participation in adult learning. Now, we've talked about this quite a lot, what drives participation in adult learning and training. And from the top of your head, you would probably say it's the level of education, it's the employment status, and it's the age. And we all know that these are the major factors driving participation. Of course, there are others that are responsible as well. And these are the factors that we have investigated for like 100 years now, and that we have found to predict participation in education. So, problem is most of it is not very susceptible to any kind of intervention or training. So it's maybe time to look at something else as well, in addition to the ones that we already know. And what I did was I looked at the motivation to learn. Motivation to learn is generally a psychological construct that explains initiation, direction, and persistence of behavior. And it has been used in very different situations in diverse contexts, and I would like to specifically focus on the motivation to learn as opposed to motivation to do other things. And we actually know quite a lot about motivation to learn because it has been researched also for decades, but only or mostly in the context of schools and higher education institutions. And from that we know that we have certain structure, certain hierarchy in these motivational beliefs. We have on the lowest or most specific level, we have motivational beliefs specific to certain school subjects mostly. And it depends on the curricula, which school subjects you will find in the structure of motivational beliefs. In recent years, the colleagues have also looked at even more fine-grained structural issues like situational motivation, how motivation changes during one lecture from the beginning, middle to end. So the situational approach is quite new to motivational research. Then we have very stable, these subject-specific motivational beliefs. We can compose higher order factors, which are the domain-specific motivational beliefs, most often used as distinguishing the mathematical domain and the verbal domain, and using, for example, the mathematical motivational beliefs to predict whether someone chooses mathematics as a major in high school or chooses a math-intensive study degree program then at university. And on top of this hierarchy, we have motivation that is tied to a specific context. So we have studies looking at like a general motivation at school or general motivation at university, or maybe in a specific adult education course when the adults are already enrolled and participating in this course. So what I was looking for was a construct that is somehow capturing motivation to learn independent of a specific content or a specific setting or context. Because when I want to research motivation to learn as a predictor of adult learning, I don't really know what the adults will do next. I don't know if they will enroll in a university program for mathematics, or whether they will enroll in a rhetorics course, or I don't know, relaxing course or sports course or whatever. So I was looking at some kind of a motivational construct that is so abstract that it can capture motivation to learn across a variety of different contents and settings. And the problem with that is when you are so abstract and you're looking for a rather stable construct, you are very much into the territory of personality research. Because the personality researchers are looking for constructs that distinguish people, that characterize people across situations, maybe their whole life, although the Big Five has been found to be quite malleable as well. So we have this hierarchy of motivational beliefs, and the top of the hierarchy, the apex of the hierarchy, is maybe even a personality construct. And when we're looking at personality constructs, we also have some candidates that have been used to investigate differences in academic achievement and also in academic learning. For example, the need for cognition is one of the constructs that has been related to academic achievement quite often, like do people like to engage in like deep thinking and effortful thinking? They are more likely to have a higher degree in education. And also the factor openness that you mentioned as well is a candidate that has been found or has been investigated in this in connection with adult learning, but also student learning and academic achievement. Now, when we want to measure global motivation to learn, of course, we have to figure out which items would be useful for that. And focusing on this global motivation to learn, we have some items that I have argued that might be useful to indicate a varying degree of motivation to learn. And these are the items. They are taken from the PIAAC 2012 cycle. They have not been inserted into the background questionnaire to measure motivation to learn. It's, I think the term was readiness to learn, and it was like a mixture of things, sometimes a little bit of learning strategy and sometimes a little bit of motivation to learn, as I would argue. And I've taken these 4 items in previous research to link them to participation in education, and also to investigate their structure and their measurement and variance across different personal groups. And against this background that I just summarized, that we do know a lot about motivation to learn, but it's also always tied to contents or context or settings, and it's not very useful to have this when we want to investigate adult education. I have 2 research questions that I have investigated in this study. The first one is, how does a global motivation to learn measure relate to other measures that are conceptually similar, but also ones who are not conceptually similar, to investigate discriminant validity, and also to participation in education. And second, if we have this global motivation to learn measure or construct, does it actually predict participation in education prospectively in the long run? Because mostly when we have the adult education survey, and as you said, we also have the cross-sectional data, we're always looking at participation in the past 12 months, but not in the next 12 months. So that was the second research question that I addressed in this study. Study 1 was a data collection that we did separate from the PIAAC. It was an online survey with adults who were out of school and out of higher education. And it was designed to measure the global motivation to learn alongside some other measures that we know capture motivation to learn from different theoretical perspectives, and also alongside some personality measures and some measures that capture the past participation in education. And we found a couple of participants to do that, and then we investigated this so-called nomological network. And when you're doing that, it looks like this. So we have motivation to learn at the center. We have, as expected, strong correlations with the concept of mastery goal orientation, which is from educational psychology, and it grasps to what extent people are looking to master things, to learn new things, and to upskill or to further develop their skills. Then we have also strong correlations with the intrinsic task value, which was measured focusing on just learning in general in this case, and also to the academic self-concept, which is related to motivational beliefs. We have a moderate relation to openness, and we have a quite strong relation to need for cognition, which I think is because these items that we used also had some proportion of deep learning level strategies. So that might be a little bit too much overlap to really distinguish the motivation to learn from the learning strategies that people are used to use. And in the study, I also investigated the correlations with the participation in education. And here what was outstanding was, of course, the highest correlation with the planned informal participation in education. Informal is mostly particularly strong because it's your own drive to learn in informal participation in education, so your own motivation to learn should be most responsible for that. But we also have it in past informal learning, and in a job-related non-formal participation education. So these results were quite promising, and the next step was then to investigate whether we actually find this prospective, predictive validity of motivation to learn. And for this, I used the PIAAC longitudinal extension that we have in Germany. We have the wave 0 was 2012, and then we have 3 more waves of data collection. And for this, I only used the wave from 2015 and 2016, because in 2014, the measure for participation in education was too weak. I only took the openness measure from the 2014 wave, and I have a range of outcome measures as included in these various questionnaires, and use structural equation modeling to investigate the question. And I had basically 3 models. So first model was only motivation to learn as a predictor and the covariates sex and age. Then I added employment status and level of education, distinguishing academic and non-academic background. And in the third model, I added literacy as a more fine-grained measure of qualification of the people that we have. And I will show you just a very condensed summary of the results that I got from these analyses. And what you can see here is the results for the 3 models, and also for the 1 model that added openness, because I wanted to see, of course, openness is also a good predictor of participation in education. And on the left-hand side, you can see the various outcome variables that were addressed in the study. What's not so interesting is the first 3 lines, because that's the cross-sectional analysis based on the 2012 study. What's more interesting is the bottom. And you can see that the motivation to learn measure has a significant effect in almost all the models. We have 3 models where it's not significant. And it's stronger for the informal learning and for the planned participation in education. And if you look at the other results, like the importance of literacy and employment status, the effect size is not that big, but it's still an important contributor, and it does so even when I'm controlling for employment status and level of education and literacy. So it seems to be important in a way still to also address motivation to learn. And what I think is particularly striking is that it's really a long time, like it's 4 years between the 2012 measure and then the 2016 measure. So I think that's quite good to have still a significant effect over such a long time. As I said, it's particularly strong for informal and planned participation in education. It's clearly distinct from openness, and it's a better predictor for participation in education than openness. So it's, I think, a promising starting point to look at further, especially because it's still significant while controlling for the other social demographic factors that we cannot change in short term. So it's, of course, you can change it if you've got enough time, but that's, I think, a promising starting point. And we know that motivation to learn is a result of our socialization in school. So it's developing over the course of primary school, secondary school, and so on. And it's probably higher in those who pursue higher education degrees, but it's still there in those who did not. In a way, maybe it's a positive, maybe it's a negative effect. We'll see about that. But it is malleable, and in other studies we found that it's a particularly important predictor for the lower levels of education, because those groups do not have such favorable opportunity structures around them. They may be employed, but they don't have an employer who says, well, don't you want to participate in the course, because they are often overlooked. So that might be a good way to go about promoting lifelong learning. Of course, there are some limitations. The scale is not ideal. It only has a very limited facet of motivation to learn. As you said, utility motivation, of course, is very strong, but that's not included in the items here. So that would be nice to have a more differentiated measure in the future. There's also some similar recent developments, like the framework of intellect by Patrick Mussel. He has a similar dimension, so maybe we can investigate what's the overlap there. But my conclusion would be it's important, and we should pay more attention to motivation to learn. And if you want to know more about the study, you can download it. It's published open access, and I'll be happy to have your questions now. Thank you. Yes.
How about the measurement? Because you mentioned that you did also the measurement invariance. So it's like pretty. How about the invariance, like by gender?
Yeah, we had that. I think it's 2017. We investigated with the PIAAC data for level of education, age groups, and gender, and it held, like the measurement invariance assumption held across these groups. Yes.
Yes. So thank you for the construct also which you developed. I've used it a lot in my research. In fact, the motivation to learn indicated by you, but unfortunately, in the latest PIAAC cycle, it's not included anymore.
Yes. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So I mean, we were, taking then the big five somewhat as a substitute. I mean, I did see with your analysis at least there's some correlation,
Yeah.
a strong one. Would you have a suggestion how to proceed? What of the big five, for example, relates most closely to the motivation to learn?
Yeah. Well, with the big five, I think they have different ways to operationalize this. If you just have the short scale, that you have 3 items for openness, and this is not so high a correlation, but in the 2014 there was some, I think they investigated some more facets of openness as well, and then they have this one item that is also, I like learning new things or something like that. So it's, if you have this item, it's probably pretty close to the motivation to learn measure. I don't know if it's in the newest version of the PIAAC. I haven't tried. Yeah.
Some countries have it, and some countries have, most countries have the short, and some countries have the long.
Yeah. Okay.
I wonder if, thank you for the presentation. I wonder if you interpret this effect after 4 years as motivation being something static, being personality-ish. It's harder to move it around, or it is just that it is so important motivation at one point for things that come later.
I think it has different components, like it has probably a more stable component, and that's why we always see this accumulation of educational degrees or educational credentials, but it also has a more variable component, and I think we could address this variable component to strengthen it. If people maybe are not very high in motivation to learn, but they still have some areas what interests them, we could try to nurture those and to get them into this pathway of ongoing lifelong learning when we address that better.
Julia, thanks for your presentation. So do you know which components are more variable over time?
No, unfortunately not, because I only have this one time measure of, like the items were only included in the 2012 and not anymore. So I'm not able to distinguish these proportional variance.
Maybe we can do something for it.
Yes. I know that some colleagues who are looking at shorter time frames, like, as I said, the situational motivation over 1 semester and then 3 measures per lecture. They have a lot of measurement points, and they have broken down what kind is stable intrinsic task value and what kind is not stable intrinsic task value, but only for like 6 months. And now we are talking about years, so maybe at first we have to get the data to do that. Yeah. Or we can try to get an intervention to raise motivation to learn and try to figure out to actually do that.